Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the Artist's Well. The Artist's Well was created to provide unique opportunities to draw inspiration from other artists around the globe and to kind of share with us insights into their workspace, their practice, the tools of the trade, techniques that they use, all these sort of things, so that we can learn from the experience that they have in their art practice. Now, today's featured artist was born in 1970. He studied at the National Concert of Art and Design in Dublin. He did a master's in art history and theory at the University of Essex. He then studied painting and old master techniques in Florence, Italy. He presently lives in and works in Wicklow, a beautiful county just south of Dublin in Ireland. To quote the artist, "I see myself as a figurative painter in the European tradition, attempting to maintain my craft at the highest level, using paint to explore the issues of truth, meaning, and value. All my paintings are attempted answers to the three questions in the title of Gauguin's famous painting. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?" So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Conor Walton to you. Conor, hi there, how are you?
Hi. Thanks for inviting me.
Not at all. Pleasure. Before we discuss your work and all that kind of thing, what I'd like you to do is just give us a quick 360 tour of your studio. Show us the various areas that you work in.
Well, this is my studio here. It's about a space. It's about 6 meters by 8 meters, and just I suppose from the entrance in.
Yeah.
I suppose I'll swing around the big north-facing window there, and from here I've got, well, it's my CD collection.
That's a big CD collection.
I'll show you my. These are my my toys, my props, my still life toys.
Yeah.
And scanner, workbench, a lot of my materials and notepads and stuff like that. I usually have a couple of big paintings up on the big walls here, but they're off with galleries at the moment. Here are my brushes and my easel, which is a modified butcher's trolley.
All right. And do you primarily work in oils, Conor?
Yeah.
All right.
So this has a stainless steel top. These are jars of pigment. I often make my paint fresh.
Oh, do you?
And then sort of swinging around, here's one of my big paintings on the easel. And here is my sort of main still life stage, I suppose you could describe it as. Like
a light box, is it?
Yeah, a bit like that. And then I've lit from underneath, and I can manipulate the light pretty much systematically here. Here is my second still life stage, which is for smaller pictures.
Yes.
And what else is there? Here's my big roll of canvas. I use linen canvas.
So do you make up your canvases yourself? Do you?
A lot of them, yes. I for the smaller pictures, I sometimes buy ready stretch canvases, but for the bigger ones, I do it myself.
And would you do that after you paint or before you paint?
In
other words, would you ever paint on a canvas sort of pinned up against the wall and then mount it later? No,
I wouldn't do that.
All right.
Sometimes I work on stretches that are too large, and re-stretch it. But I like to work on a stretched canvas.
Yeah.
I like the bounce and the tension.
Yes.
This is my main easel at the moment. And what you can see here, usually there'd be a laptop here,
right?
But it has a secondary screen which is up on a. This is sort of, I think you can see it's on a modified computer
Desk.
table,
Yes, yes.
which is on wheels, and then I'd have a laptop here, and then an auxiliary screen. And I use this, rather than painting from photographs, if I have to work from photographs, which I don't like doing a lot, but if I have to do that, I put the images up on the auxiliary screen, and then I can work directly from, I can set the screen beside the canvas
Yeah.
and work almost like, to scale, almost like I was working from the object.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So that's it really. I've got lots of lights, during the winter I use the lights above the window, which, work as a sort of an alternative skylight. And it's a nice space that I work from home. So this is down at the end of my house. The house is it was a convent, and it's quite spacious. So I was able to put in this big studio, which is, it's large enough to paint quite large pictures. It's also large enough to use as a teaching studio. I can get 10 students in here in a model under pretty much ideal circumstances.
Yes, yes. That's big. Yeah, very big.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was sort of looking at your work, Conor, I found that you could almost divide your practice into 4 parts. You've got your teaching aspect. Then you've got the portrait commissions, which I think we'll see an image or 2 of as well.
Yeah.
And then you've got what I think we both agreed are called the bread and butter paintings.
Yeah.
And they literally are bread and butter too, but we'll go into that. And then I classify the rest as Conor Walton Unleashed, because it's you doing your own thing without any sort of commercial desire to impress people. It's very much your stamp. So they're the 4 areas that when we go into our presentation, the PowerPoint, we'll see some examples of that. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about technique, because you were certainly a realist, but you have a lovely loose technique as well. And I know grapes figure in quite a number of your paintings, and that's sort of a symbol for you as well, sort of trademark almost. But the way you do that, I think, is very interesting. And there's a time-lapse video that I'd like to show that shows you doing that. And then maybe having done that, you could explain what your thinking is and how your approach to drawing what is fairly simple, but actually quite a complex piece, okay? Sure. So I'll just bring up that video. We don't see, we don't perceive the world the way a camera perceives the world. Our eyes are very primitive organs in lots of ways, and they can only take in so much data at a time sequentially. And what tends to happen, when you see a shape, you might say, right, that's a shape, and then you say, oh, that's a figure, that's a man, that's a middle-aged man, that's a middle-aged man with a beard, and you build up the image sequentially, and also projecting a huge amount onto what you see. In terms of an awful lot of everyday seeing is just projection, because there's an illusion that we all have that we're seeing a complete realistic world.
the information that we're getting is quite small
Yes.
in real time.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an illusion that our brain basically projects out onto the world that it's complete.
Yes.
And that is what I try to play with when I paint. When I paint, I try to build the picture in that sequential way, so that when I'm painting a bunch of grapes, I start with a splodge. That
Yes.
it's essentially it's a splodge
Mm-hmm.
of color.
Yes.
The background, and then you add information to it in quite a logical sequential way, so that the image is fulfilled. And each mark that I make stands for an act of perception. That's the idea, and I want it to stand. Every mark. I don't want to obliterate anything that I do. It is all to grow and build up. So
you're really you're not painting grapes at all. You're
no.
painting shapes and values and color.
I'm painting. Yeah, I'm painting just little shards of light, essentially light and color.
Yeah.
And trying to add them up, and then that allows the brain, the viewer's brain, to project completeness onto the image, so that someone will look at that and say, oh yeah, it's a bunch of grapes. But then the painting sort of begs for closer scrutiny, and when more closely scrutinized, breaks down into the shards, the gestures, and that tension between very distinct gestural marks and the unity of the object is maintained, and that you don't have to draw circles and color them in.
Right, exactly.
And to some extent, if you don't draw the circles, the mind does it for you. The viewer's mind will do that job for you and be tickled in the process.
Yes.
That when you leave something for the viewer to do, and they fulfill it, it satisfies the viewer in a way that if I do the whole job for the viewer and come up with this sort of immaculate, photorealistic, high definition thing, I think one of the reasons why I and a lot of people find, photorealism, this really sort of high definition photorealism slightly repulsive, is that it just leaves you with no work to do in decoding or understanding the image.
Yes.
Everything is resolved at the level of technique, and nothing is left to the imagination.
Yes.
Or to the viewer. So I try to always sort of involve the viewer in a sort of a conspiracy with me,
Yeah. Yes.
That there's a bit of a little bit of a tug of war, a little bit of a collaboration.
Yeah, very good. I noticed as well that you use a combination of brushes, but you also use a palette knife.
Yes.
Palette knife. What does that bring to the table or to the canvas?
Well, I use fairly heavy body paint, which is much more easily manipulated with a palette knife. I also paint on a slightly roughened canvas surface, which takes a lot of paint. It holds a lot of paint. So the palette knife is part of the process, maybe as much or more than brushes, in terms of mixing my paint on the palette, often applying it. I find that, a palette knife like, where is it? Yeah, like this, with a point on it, that can offer a level of precision that few brushes could. Like you can be as precise with this as you can with a fine rigger brush or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So you can also use, I tend to use brushes like this, a palette knife like this, which are long and flat and can cover a big area. And then because my canvas is slightly rough, it's slightly like
Yeah.
I need to use the palette knife to sort of bed the canvas, bed the paint down,
Sure.
so that you don't have too sandpapery a final surface, which then will catch, will sort of glisten in the light. So I tend to use them for that. But it's just, I think, a lot of what I'm doing when I make the mark is trying to make it count as a single gesture, and I think palette knives are great for that because they can do a lot of work very simply.
Interesting. That's very, very interesting.
But it's one thing, I think that the danger when people get into palette knife work is that they end up troweling paint on, and that it literally becomes like plastering a wall.
Yes.
And that's not technically sound. And I don't think it's very aesthetically satisfying. So like my paint surface isn't going to be very overloaded. I'm using the palette knife to make sort of clean, clear decisions rather than pile canvas onto pile paint onto the canvas.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Conor, we'll get to showing some images now. And as I said, your practice is split into four, or could be said to be split into four, in that you've got your teaching aspect, you've got the portraits, commissions, the bread and butter paintings, and then Conor Walton, the artist, unleashed, as I say. So, Conor, you have a summer school, which attracts a lot of people, but I suppose this year, not so. Would I be right?
Yeah, I didn't run it this year for a variety of reasons. Obviously, that the pandemic wasn't going to make it possible, really, and I didn't run it last year either because it's a summer thing, and I had a big show last summer, which sort of precluded doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started the summer school in 2017, and got a great response, and it certainly went down well. What I wanted to do was have an intensive course, a course that was aimed at quite a high level. So, I needed a bigger pool of students than Ireland could really afford to get the quality that I wanted. So I was looking to advertise essentially from abroad and get students in from abroad, and did that. And then ran the summer school as a sort of a residential course where, a lot of the non-Irish students stayed with us in the house. And it was, the work day was sort of 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. with breakfast and lunch and dinner thrown in. And, we had great fun.
Yes.
And a lot of, interesting discussion over meals and everything, but very much sort of all absorbing. And that's what I wanted to try and do. And I think that worked.
So you've had a number of different nationalities.
Yes, I've had people from Australia, from the States, South America, Ireland, and it was great. And I always had a scholarship student as well.
Yes.
Aiming the scholarship at a young artist, a student or someone like that, who maybe wouldn't be able to afford this. A lot of people who do these sort of courses are often, there might be professionals and semi-professional artists, and can afford to spend, maybe $1,000 or euros or something like that, going to spend a week with an artist and try to learn from the best.
Yes.
But not everyone can do that. So I wanted to have a scholarship place, and that's important. And I'd love to get maybe 2 scholarship places the next time.
Yeah.
So doing that and making it a really immersive learning experience, so that you sort of come away. I think, you know, a lot of people, I hope they would come away possibly not totally fulfilled by the course itself, because we try to cover so much, but with a lot of food for thought. Yes. And lessons that it may take a year or two or more to absorb.
Well, hopefully you get back on track now in 2021.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay, the other aspect of your practice is, oh, sorry, I've left these out. Sorry, I as you probably know, I love drawing, and I was just very taken with these two drawings. One, I think, is one of your professors, am I right?
Yes, Kerry Clark, who was my teacher at NCAD, and is still going strong, and a great painter.
Yeah, beautiful. I just love that you love your use of light there.
Yeah, I love drawing. It's really foundational, and so much of what I do as a painter, I owe to an experience of drawing and being able to work, you know, very much, you know, direct from life, without the photo, just you know, responding to what's in front of me. I used to go every Thursday to the life drawing session in the RHA, which was started out as a bunch of artists getting together, and then sort of grew into the RHA school. But that was, you know, it was great. I just used to love going along, and often just picking, you know, I made a habit of coming along late to the sessions, and picking the spot to draw that nobody else wanted, and trying to make an interesting picture out of it, you know.
Yes.
So that was sort of interesting.
Yeah.
And then just, you know, the discipline of strict observation and truthfulness, you know, a sort of a witnessing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think the next one is one of your many portraits that you've done. I mean, this is something that you do at a very high level, isn't it? You've done plenty of church and state figures.
A few, yes. Yeah. The army seem to like what I do. I've had a few chiefs of staff of the army. That this is General Conor Walton, who was the last army chief of staff, and that was unveiled by the Minister of Defence at the time, at retirement.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, it's nice. I like doing the portraits. A lot of that sort of portrait work tends to be, you know, it can be sort of the rich and famous, or the successful, or people at the end of their careers. Mm-hmm. It's limited aesthetically in the freedom that you have, you know. Like if you do the army, you know, like I tried to change the formula a little bit, you know. I was sort of saying, you know, can we get you in camouflage gear, or, you know, and it's like, oh no, it has to be protocol. The cap has to be under the arm. Yes. The medals have to be on show, and it's all like it's hard to break new ground in that sort of picture. Yeah. But it can be done well, you know.
And would the sitter be sitting for long, and would they be sitting while you're doing the detail of their uniform, or would you do that from a photograph?
What I usually try to do is a good head study from life, mm-hmm. and then some color notes on terms of the uniform. Like obviously, if you're dealing with a VIP, it's a bit difficult to get them to stand there while you're doing the buttons on their jacket or stuff like that.
Exactly.
But I have done that to some extent. Like I think that portrait took 6 sessions, and 2 of those were for the head study, which is in my studio. I can show it to you. It's on my wall here. And then I did some work, you know, based on that. and
Yes.
on photos, and then brought them back in to see it. Yeah, you can see it maybe at the end of the slideshow. I'll show
Sure.
the study.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Conor, we all have to make a living.
Yeah.
And I know some of your very big works are into the many thousands, tens of thousands. But everyone would like a piece of you. So I know you do these fabulous paintings of, as we call the bread and butter series, but biscuits as well, and a couple of other things.
Yeah.
And grapes.
Yeah, I practice what I suppose I think of as mixed farming, and with different crops, maturing at different rates.
Yeah.
Just in order to earn a living, the economics of being a practicing artist can be a little bit cruel. And if I to earn something like the average industrial wage in Ireland, I need to be selling roughly 50,000 euros worth of painting a year, because I've got expenses as well as the income at the end of it.
Yeah.
And
they're called children.
you have to produce. It becomes a little bit like you have to produce so much work a week almost, yes, just to do that. And some of what I do, I essentially have to produce fairly quickly, and they need to be fairly simple works. So what I call my bread and butter paintings are very much based on a fairly simple approach to direct observation, and I just try to do it very, very well. And to exploit there's a certain amount of philosophy in these paintings, or painter's philosophy. Like the previous one of the bread and butter is essentially as the meditation on sort of the silver and gold, the aesthetic of silver and gold. We've got the sort of flash of gold, and then a sort of a general sort of overall sort of silvery aesthetic, which plays into the warm and cools, and then the sort of sense of a still life that it can be an offering. Yes. There's a phrase from Heidegger. He talked about a kind of thinking, which is also a kind of thanking. And I like that idea, that yes, that there is that there can be a simple sort of gratefulness for simple pleasures in my simpler paintings.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, technically, this is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, these are by far the most commercially popular pictures. They are relatively unproblematic for a lot of people, whereas some of my larger, more complicated pictures sort of demand more of the viewer. But these are fairly straightforward in terms of what they depict, and I just try to do it very well. And it's almost like making icons. I half think of myself as a frustrated icon painter. And if I paint a loaf of bread, I'm going to try to make it as iconic as I can. That it's something that one could almost pray to. If you wanted to. The god of bread, whether it's Ceres or Bacchus, as grain god, or whatever else it stands behind these simple objects.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on then, Conor, to these other areas, which is you really talking and getting a message across. Would you like to talk us through this particular one?
This painting is, it's called Still Life with Judgment. I've basically done a series of very similar compositions with the life mask in the weighing scale and on a stack of books and with the fruit underneath, and sort of varied the color scheme and light and color harmonies to get as much variety out of it as possible. Yeah. It's allegory essentially. It is exploiting the old vanitas, still life theme, the vanity of vanities idea, and the still life with judgment notion. It's sort of there's an ironic play on the notion of judgment, a painting requiring judgment, but it is literal in that the first book under the weighing scales is Kant's Critique of Judgment, and the mask in the scales itself refers to the last judgment and the weighing of souls. So what I'm trying to balance in the picture are sort of intellectual ideas and sensual pleasure. That there's sort of an earthy sensuality to the fruit that is attractive, and they are painted in a trompe-l'oeil fashion. That they're it's all life size. It's intended to appeal very directly to the senses and the sense of touch, and then behind this there is a sort of a more intellectual structure pointing to some extent to a different world or to a way of thinking about the contents of the painting.
Very good. Now I put this in because it gives me that sinking feeling,
Yeah. This picture was I suppose the proximate inspiration was watching a Norwegian painter, Odd Nerdrum, doodle. We were sitting in a cafe in New York, and he was doodling away in his notebook, making compositions. And one of them was a self-portrait where he was standing on the back of a sinking boat. And the idea appealed to me, and I sort of adapted it and further developed it during the financial crisis, where I thought it was sort of a pertinent way of looking at what was going on in the world. So I obviously imagined myself in this boat, which is already half submerged, or more than half submerged, but I'm still rowing. It's like you can't. I don't know whether you've had that feeling of things aren't going entirely your way, but you can't stop trying to keep going. Yeah. You have to sort of you're trying to keep the show on the road even while you are failing to doing so. So I wanted to sort of conjure up that feeling, and where I do a self-portrait or something like that, there's a personal element to it, but I also try to be representative of larger things, where I use myself as sort of a proxy for humanity or what's going on in the world. So there's a personal element to this, but I think it's maybe a reflection of how a lot of people felt about their world, things in their world not going too well, and that sinking feeling.
Yes.
But I wanted it also to be quite beautiful, and for there to be a sense of calm about it, as a like it's a moment of peace and contemplation and beauty within the the inevitable disaster, and sort of balance the sort of the negative or the ironic with something that's actually reconciling and
yes.
and peaceful.
Yes. Okay. Did I hear rumor that was bought by a company?
Yes, it was bought, I think, Biogen Pharmaceuticals in America, and I sort of thought it was funny that this might end up in a corporate collection or a corporate boardroom. I thought, the idea of a painting like this hanging in a corporate boardroom, I thought it was the ultimate irony.
Absolutely.
You can imagine it being the least likely picture as an image of corporate success.
Yes. Yes.
Obviously, it appealed to someone. So
they probably look at it every day, but no one dares talk about it. Okay. All right, moving on then. I think I have three more to show.
Yeah, this is called Allegory of Wisdom, and again is sort of a large, complex allegory, sort of a revisiting of the theme of the Tree of Knowledge and the sort of Adam and Eve figure, and the notion of corruption, evil, knowledge, those sort of things. I never particularly liked the biblical take on the knowledge being the curse. I wanted to present a more positive image, and Nietzsche's phrase, where the tree of knowledge stands, there you will always find paradise. I liked that. So I wanted to represent, the figure of the boy in the center, receiving offerings essentially from either side, and that the two figures represent, to some extent, different types of knowledge. The female figure essentially standing for a sort of a receptiveness, where we find out certain things. We are granted certain insights as gifts, where you just have to be receptive. Where you have to be open to experience and the gift that the world presents to you. And then on the other side, you have the male figure who is the sort of the hunter, bringing in the dead animal. And he stands for the sort of knowledge which is, the knowledge that you have to go out and get and struggle for, and is maybe rueful and tainted with bitter experience. So I wanted to sort of represent both of these sort of aspects to learning, and have the figure of the boy in the middle representing what I would think of as a sort of an intellectual puberty. I don't know whether you've experienced it, but my experience of my youth and my teenage years was a sort of a long wow, where you find out things and your world expands in leaps and bounds, and there's a sort of an ecstasy of discovery and learning. And I wanted the boy himself to stand in the shadows, sort of in the midst of this accumulation, but to have the sky behind, representing a little bit of the sort of the state of mind, the sort of the brainstorm going on internally. And also, I suppose, to represent an ideal of humanity in nature, of humanity as in harmony with nature, receiving, the fruit of the tree of knowledge as a gift. In this case, it's from a baboon in a fig tree, and it's based, the source image was an ancient Egyptian painting of people harvesting figs from a fig tree, in which baboons were in it. That the baboons were in the tree, and people were picking the fruit from it. And I thought this was a really lovely image of animal and human and plant apparently at peace with each other. And in Egyptian mythology, the baboon is the symbol of Thoth, who's the sort of the god of learning and wisdom. So I thought that was sort of a way of closing the symbolic circle.
Yes.
This is.
What is it?
It's 4 feet by 8 feet, or 240 centimeters. It's called An Ape's Lens Compared to Man's, and it's sort of, again, a contemplation of human relationship with nature, with the animal world. It's based on an illustration from an old book, Primates, where there was a double-page spread which showed what was essentially Vitruvian Man after Leonardo, the man fitting perfectly within the square.
Yeah.
And beside that was a gibbon, which didn't fit perfectly within the square because its arms are much longer than its legs. And this was showing the relative proportions. But the fact that the gibbon looked sort of like it had been crucified, and that the image of man was sort of a little bit like, Christ in glory, the sort of very powerful, dominant image. I thought that was sort of an interesting comparison. I decided to build a picture out of it and used, I suppose, various art historical models. I was thinking of Courbet's atelier primarily. I thought I could create a space where I could situate myself, these images like, iconic paintings, friends and enemies, apes, my children, and behind it, which I'm not sure that you can see very well, but sort of like a running frieze at the back of the picture, is the evolution from ape to man, which extends right across the picture to the end, where it's the future, so to speak, is obscured by a large curtain, while this sort of rather sort of majestic and slightly fascistic looking figure, sort of figure of man, the hero, strides forward. And in the foreground, then you have a monkey being weighed. And this again reverts to the notion of the Last Judgment and the weighing of souls. So it's sort of like a picture, a little bit like, dealing with time and the end of time, and how we will be judged, how we will relate to, to nature, to our endowment, whether we will destroy the planet, whether where we're going.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And how long would that have taken you to execute?
The picture itself advanced over about a year, but there were many preliminaries to this.
Yeah.
And I did paint a version of this back in art college.
Did you?
So that was sort of a relatively crude version, but some elements of that picture sort of survived into the latest one. So it's sort of it's sort of a strange sort of palimpsest of figures, some of whom are, these are still friends, but they're friends as they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And then my children ended up in the picture, and sort of a whole combination of people from different times and ages.
Yeah, fascinating. Long time in the making.
Yes.
This here is called The New Religion, isn't it?
Yes. And it's working with some of the same themes of our relationship with nature. It's sort of constructed and very much based on a sort of a Bellini Sacra Conversazione, where the typical Bellini altarpiece, where the Madonna and Child are central, and beneath you have assembled sort of saints and martyrs, and then a little sort of choir of angels with their musical instruments singing, and sort of set in maybe a natural context or a sort of a simple architectural context. So I again, as the frustrated icon painter, I've always wanted to paint a picture like that, but not being a card-carrying Christian, and not feeling that I could paint a picture of Madonna and Child straight. I felt a need to sort of find a different way in. And one idea I had was to essentially make it about nature and our relationship with nature. So I instead of the Madonna and Child, I put a chimpanzee mother and infant, and the baby infant, a little bit like the way Jesus might be, that the baby Jesus might be, is giving the sign of the blessing, the raised two fingers and the crossed two little fingers.
Yeah.
And to put my saints as the founders of modern biology and natural history. So you've got Charles Darwin on the left, Gregor Mendel, the founder of genetics. You've got James Lovelock on the far right, Gaia theory, and a Neanderthal doing the sort of the John the Baptist pose, and then beneath those the martyrs, the gorilla with a bullet hole, the rhinoceros with a bullet hole in the side of its head, the gorilla again as the endangered species, and the dodo at the bottom as extinct. But I wanted to make it, while referring to our dysfunction, in the dysfunction in our relationship with nature, to try to make it a sincerely joyful picture, to have my children in it, sort of singing their ode, and to, while there's an element of a slight element of facetiousness in substituting the Madonna for the chimpanzee, I also wanted to try to produce a painting which contained a blessing authentically, that maybe, in whatever form it can take, that we need, we need to be forgiven. We need to forgive ourselves for the dreadful mismanagement of the planet that we're engaged with at the moment. So that was partly what I wanted to do in terms of the blessing, that sort of put in the good and the bad, but overall tried to seek a balance between them, sort of a harmony, to sort of conjure a little bit of the harmony with nature that you perceive in the old Bellini paintings, because that's what I love about those Bellini pictures, that there's a sense of the human in nature, belonging in that world and harmonious with it. And that was what I was trying to, in some ways, recover by a very circuitous route.
Right, very good. Wonderful, wonderful work. And this, I just love the lighting, and could you tell us very briefly about this, and then we move on to the last?
It's called Speechless.
Yeah.
And my idea for the painting was the notion of painting as mute poetry, and to see what can be communicated essentially without words, just through, through the eyes, just through the setup of color and light and things like that.
Yes.
And like the old notion, painting is supposed to be mutapoiesis, mute poetry, this figure. So it's an allegory of painting where she stands for, painting itself, for what I do, for what I try to do.
Yes, very good, lovely. And finally, and I know this is a deeply personal picture, if you could talk us about through this one.
Yeah, it's a picture of my son Daniel. When he was 4, he was diagnosed with leukemia, and we spent best part of 2 years basically battling with him in hospital through his illness. And he relapsed. He had bone marrow transplant and a very long recuperation from that. We came a lot closer to losing him than we would have liked. And I wanted to paint a picture of him, but I couldn't do it until we got him home, essentially. And we spent close to a year with him, essentially in isolation at home, where he couldn't mix with other kids and was homeschooled.
Yes.
And he started off that period still as a very sick boy, like, bald, emaciated, with tubes, up his nose and out of his chest. There's a scar to the left of his chest there, which is where the Hickman line went in, which is sort of this sort of contraption that all the medicines go straight into a vein, go in. And I suppose my idea for the painting was to make him as present as possible, to bring him as close to me as a painting possibly could. So he was painted life size, and he literally stood beside the canvas while I painted it. And the key was, I suppose, the concept of the key. And I put when I framed it, I put a little escutcheon, a little keyhole into the frame to make it like a door or a window, so that he's on the other side, and and the symbolism will be like, here I am, here's the key, you can access me, I'm right there. And of course, at the time, I didn't know whether we would continue to have access to him. But I wanted to make a picture which would bring him as close as possible while we definitely had him. Now, he made a great recovery, and over the year that I painted it, he came back to full health. So the picture sort of evolved with his return to health, and became, to some extent, I suppose, a little bit of a sort of a talisman for his return. It became a little bit more of a celebration. And one of the pleasures of that picture is that there's a copy of it hanging in the Children's Hospital, and the parents and the children who go past it, because it's the cancer ward, and all the kids have that Hickman line. There's a context, I suppose, a special context that they would understand, in that scar marks him out as a survivor.
Yes.
Yes. That this picture hangs at the entrance to the bone marrow ward, and only half the kids who go in there come out, essentially. The success rate is 50%. So that picture, I think, for those entering, it may have a sort of a different meaning, that here is the survivor, and here's a kid saying, here's the key, because when you're in there, the one thing you want is to get out, it's to escape that confinement. And on the other side of that confinement is a new life. Yeah. So that is sort of what it came to represent, I think, in that context. But more generally for me as well, because so much of my work deals with symbolism and meaning, I also wanted it to be a talisman of that, so that again, for someone who wouldn't necessarily know the backstory, this is like a painting that represents the notion of, here there's a key to this picture, that there's a way in to the picture, and I'm offering it to you, so that it's like it's an opening, it's an entrance, and he stands as a sort of a mediator between the viewer and this other world. Yeah. So I was sort of trying to kill several birds with the one stone in this. It's sort of there's a personal element as a picture of my son, and then I suppose, the two elements of his experience as a cancer survivor and how that would relate to other cancer survivors, and then how I can fit it into my sort of iconology.
Mm-hmm. And it's great to hear that at 15 years of age now, he's a fine, strapping lad.
Yes, he's doing great. He's going into transition year, and he's in the last year he's read most of Shakespeare's plays, and he's going on reading Russian novels and playing the piano and taking life seriously.
And is there any danger he might follow his daddy's footsteps?
I don't think there's any fear of that. My children are running the opposite way. They see my world, and I don't think they're too delighted with it. Although you
never know.
Yeah, I think like a lot of artists who have children, they're mortified by the artistic lifestyle, because it's not like anyone else, and they wish that their parents were normal, like accountants or something like that, Like, why couldn't their parents be bankers or accountants or
so you'd scare the wits out of them, basically.
Because kids just want to be conventional at a certain point, and having a crazy parent who has lots of crazy pictures around the house, lots of nudie pictures around the house, it's all very mortifying. But I think they also see it's not easy to earn a living as an artist, and they see the hard side of that.
Sure.
So they'll probably react against me and go and do something very sensible.
Yeah. Okay. Conor, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. We're going to open up to the floor now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Colleen. Off you go.
Sure. I was just noticing you have a very strong interest and reference in anthropology and history. I was wondering, in art history, do you have a particular time period or style or artist that inspires you a lot, especially right now?
I've tried to draw lessons from each period. As a youngster, as a teenager, I loved Renaissance art. I just loved the classic Italian Renaissance, and also the Flemish masters. Jan van Eyck, Roger van der Weyden. They were my first love, and are still a great love of mine. Then I got into the Baroque, and I found a love for Rembrandt and Rubens and that gang, Caravaggio, and I then discovered a love for the great 18th century painters, Chardin, Watteau, and the sort of the what I found particularly interesting was the sort of the intellectual conversation about painting that was going on. Like particularly in England, so you've got Reynolds' discourses and Hogarth's analysis of beauty as these sort of really interesting texts, which are to some extent sort of foundational texts for the theory of painting. And that was, partly what I ended up doing my master's thesis on, and that sort of thing. And then, I've almost followed it sort of sequentially, in that I then got to terms with the Romantics and taking on the challenge of their worldview and the importance they put on our relationship with nature, which was already sort of beginning to become a sort of a vexed issue for the Romantics in terms of the Industrial Revolution and city life, and how to balance that with the notion of harmony with nature. And that's sort of been quite central to my work. The notion of authenticity, which is at the heart of the Romantic artwork, is a very important concept for me. And then I had to come to terms with modernism and the challenge of that, which is, I think, very much the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and how art fits in with, this modern technological civilization that we have built, and the whole notion of progress, and progress as it's applied to art, whether this whole story can be seen as progress or not. And that's sort of, that's where 20th century art tends to become rather political. And you've tended to have, the modernists pushing their view of, ours is the way forward, and you can't do any of the traditional stuff any longer because that's all dead, it's past, it's history. And my own view, which is that that's not really the case, and that modernism, the progressive view of art history has run into major trouble. It's sort of hit a sort of a reductio ad absurdum, with each sort of theoretical progressive move sort of reducing the notion of talent, genius, and all of these things to something that's absurd and mercenary. Where Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons, what they do, it's really a money game. So that's sort of where I think sort of brings me up to date. But there's I think you have to take the core of what each period offers and see each artist in their age bringing something, bringing a very authentic and sincere response to the problem of how to produce work under those circumstances. And and that's just looking at 1500 to 2000 2020. I also love medieval art and ancient art, and there's so much going on. There's so much going on of interest in the contemporary world, and the various non-Western traditions, which I've barely even got to grips with, really, because I at the end of the day, I'm European painter, and that's my tradition. That's what I really need to know about. But I love all the other stuff too.
Very good, very good. Okay, I think we'll leave it there, guys. Thank you very, very much indeed, Conor. I know I speak on behalf of everybody who's watching and that will be watching on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for the time that you put into this, for your honesty and frankness about the way you work, your thinking process, everything like that. It was just a fabulous insight into how you work. And we look forward to seeing many more fabulous works from you in the future.
Well, thanks, Alan. Thanks for everyone who took the time to listen in, and I hope I wasn't too boring. And
not at all.
It's great to have these forums and ways of connecting with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to see any more work of Conor's, you can look up Conor Walton, CONORWALTON.com, and you'll see a large range of his work in that. It's an excellent site, and some videos as well you can have a look at. So thank you again, Conor, and thank you all very much for watching, and look forward to seeing you next week.